this generation of video game developers, I think, have been obsessed with remakes of classic games. And I've been thinking about it a lot here recently, especially with the rumors of there being a Final Fantasy IX remake. Now, I've not played the original Final Fantasy IX. I intend to. Just like I intend to play all of the mainline Final Fantasy games. But, you know, the thing with remakes is I'm both for and against it. If you were to ask me, would I prefer a remake of 7 over Final Fantasy 17? I'd pick Final Fantasy 17 because, obviously the PS1 classic Final Fantasy 7, graphics-wise, has not aged well at all. But when we're talking about video games, to me, the most important thing is, the game, because that ultimately is what it is. And, the original Final Fantasy 7 has a lot more to offer than some modern games, and a lot of them, actually, in my opinion. Not that, 7 Remake, I'm playing through 7 Remake right now, and I'm about done with it. I like it. I like it a lot. It has some things that I could do without, but I'll talk about that in a future video. But they released that bad boy. They're releasing that bad boy in 3 parts, and I suspect we're not going to get part 3 for maybe another 2 or 3 years. I would guess. I hope that if this Final Fantasy IX remake ends up being true, that they don't release it in parts. And I was discussing with a fellow Final Fantasy fan about Final Fantasy VIII, and they're, I'd love to get that one remade, but I feel like visually wise, especially with the HD remasters, which I prefer the HD remasters because the HD remaster of 8 is incredible. It's still viably playable. Now, and that's the good case for remakes. Like games like Haunting Ground, where you're lucky to find a good copy for $200 to $300, sometimes $400, more than buying some consoles, a single game. I think you could argue for something like that, Dino Crisis or Xenogears, and we'll get into that in a second, would deserve the remake treatment. And I think maybe in a way now that studios have had success with Final Fantasy VII and the Resident Evil games and Dead Space, maybe they can dig into their more obscure categories and they can use all sorts of speak, like from the makers of Resident Evil 2 remake or whatever when they do Dino Crisis. But I still think that if they're quality games, they'll resell. But I'm part of the problem because I loved the Alone in the Dark remake. I still need to go into my second playthrough as David Harbour's character. Yes, the combat has some issues, but the exploration, atmosphere, and music, 10 out of 10. Would highly recommend. And then the remake of Resident Evil 4 is my favorite Resident Evil. And going back to Dead Space, I feel like Dead Space, the original, is a near-perfect game. In fact, I would go to say that it might very well be perfect. And it's aged very well, in my opinion. And as I've watched clips of the remake and stuff, and it looks really good. And I've heard it plays really well, and I'm not surprised by that. But the thing is, it's just like the original was already fantastic. It didn't need a remake, in my opinion. Now, while I wouldn't go out and buy the Dead Space remake because I feel like the original is perfect, if I was to get it as a gift, then that would be the case where I would play it. But thinking about it, like if Final Fantasy IX remake ends up being a thing, I'll react to the trailers and stuff like that for the channel, but I don't know if I'm going to end up buying the game until maybe later down the line when it's at a discount price and I've played the original, because the original is so readily available, unlike games like Dino Crisis or Haunting Ground. Dino Crisis is a little bit more accessible than Haunting Ground because you can buy it digitally on the PS3, but eventually that sort of thing it's going to go away. I hope that day never comes, but I think eventually it will. amazing that Sony has kept the PlayStation 3 store up this long. And I think it also has to do a bigger problem with, studios wanting to play it safe. Like, well, we know Final Fantasy VII is one of Square's most successful games. And they were able to bet largely on, the remake trilogy being a success. And it has been. And most people have liked it. I'm excited to get to Rebirth after I play 16. But, the whole reason I bought a PS5 wasn't to play Final Fantasy VII Remake or Rebirth. It was to play Final Fantasy 16. To me, the Final Fantasy series are system sellers for me. So it's like if Final Fantasy 17 ends up, I hope it comes out before the PlayStation 6, but let's say that it is a PlayStation 6 exclusive. That'll be a reason for me to get it, unless it's like the most recent PS5 Pro, where it's over $700 without a disc drive, and that's a whole thing in itself. And as I've talked about this thing with remakes with fans, and I know these companies are huge, and it's not like I think they'll continue to make sequels to stuff like Resident Evil and Final Fantasy. I think Final Fantasy 17 is inevitable. I think Resident Evil 9 is inevitable. But I think it would be great to have, I don't know, the teams that make these remakes be moving this franchise forward. It would be different if Final Fantasy 7, if there wasn't a port for all modern consoles. I could see the argument for the remake, like, the only way to play Final Fantasy 7 is on a PS1 disc. Like, you couldn't play it on literally anything. Like, you literally play it on phones now, which is insane. But it's weird because a lot of these remakes I've liked. Resident Evil 2 remake was my first Resident Evil. So, I've been somewhere on the fence, and in the middle. But I think as I talk about it, I gear more towards, I want to see the franchises move forward rather than milking the past, so to speak. But I think that this trend is going to continue. And I think we're going to continue to get remakes. And I think that the point that remakes will get made fun of is sort of like when The Last of Us Part 1 got a remake on PS5 in addition to the remake on 4. I mean, it's been remade twice already, which is stupid. But I think once studios get to the point where they're remaking games that were made only 4 years ago, that's where you get a problem. And whereas like games like Xenogears, which is a cult classic, and that the second disc is mostly kind of sort of a glorified slideshow. Well, from what I've heard, but games like that, I think deserve it'd be cool to see Xenogears get a Octopath Traveler treatment. I do, and there are remakes that I'm excited about, like Silent Hill 2 remake. I'm excited about, and I'm going to get, and I think that's one that seems reasonable to me because. The HD collection is the most affordable way to get it. Like, you can get it on Xbox Series X. I bought it for like $10. And, people flip out whenever they tell you they play the HD remaster version of it. But I didn't have any issues at all. And I think that if you didn't play the original PS2 version, then you're not going to notice any difference. But if you were to want to play the original Silent Hill 2, you would have to shell out a couple $100 for a good PS2 copy. And I'm interested to see what other people have to say about this because it's an interesting thing to me, and I don't think it's necessarily going to stop anytime soon because I suspect that Silent Hill 2 remake will do good, and I think that the 2D remake of, I think it's either Dragon Quest, I think it's Dragon Quest 3. I think that's going to do really well, and I think I'm actually going to end up getting that. And then there's a remake of Romancing Saga 2 coming out. And I think as long as there's still a lot of love and care put into games that are remade, and it's not just a cash grab. I think while I liked the remake of Resident Evil 3, I think a lot of people felt like it was lazy, and I can see their point, because compared to 2 and 4, the remake of 3 is severely lacking. It really is. Like, it's a good game, like it's fun, but it's way too short, and it lacks the content of the other remakes, including the remake of 1. But comment below, let me know what you think of this, whether you're a heavy gamer or not, or because I think it's a similar problem with the movie industry as well. But I think the difference is, like the live action Disney remakes feel like soulless cash grabs, and then whereas like something like the remake of FF7 does feel like there's a lot of love put into it. I will say that. So comment below, let me know. Take care.